All right, good morning everyone. Welcome back and we're happy to see you again. Yeah, I would say we will start right off with our third panel today on investment control, and we are starting with Oriana Balsamo. She's a PhD candidate in European law under a joint supervision between Luis Guido Carli and the University in Rome and Université Paris de Panthéon-Assas. And her research mostly focuses on EU economic security, foreign direct investment screening, and the constitutional balance between the internal market and national security. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Let me thank first the conveners and organizers of this conference, and also the speaker of today and yesterday. I hope all of you are early birds, so you like morning. So thank you also for the presentation. Today I'm here to present actually working paper that I'm doing right now, so it's a research still going on. And the title, as you can see, is the reform of the FDI Screening Regulation, Economic Security as an Internal Market Objective. So the agenda of today is structured like this. So first I will try to make some introductory remark. Then I will look into the EU regulatory framework for FDI screening, and then the reform proposal and its two principal innovation, because as we will see, we'll have more than one innovation, but because of matter of time, I will just focus on two. And then I will look into two different aspects. The first one is the compatibility of national screening mechanisms with internal market logic. And the last one is the financial sector as a case study. And meanwhile, I will do my analysis. I will explain why I took the financial sector, and then I will finalize my analysis with several concluding remarks. So let me start with some introduction remarks. Whenever we talk to FDI, right now we still talk about Regulation 2019-452, which I know that a lot of you is familiar with. Yesterday was mentioned a lot of time. Still, I will just try to point out several features that might be helpful for the following analysis. The first thing is that the regulation was now adopted not to complete the internal market, because it's outside the logic of internal market, stricto sensu, but to discipline how the regulation from internal market works. In fact, Article 1 states that the main objective is the protection of security and public order. In this sense, whenever the regulation was adopted, actually with the proposal of 2027, the main criticism was that this instrument was part of the several instruments that the Union was taking to make recourse to protectionism. Still, from the practice, we saw that actually we're talking about selective openness, mainly because we're not talking the block of all investment, but just FDI, and among all of them, just those considered risky for the security and the public order of member state and the Union as well. In particular, just to bring you some statistic from the latest one that the Commission published, we just have the 1% of blocking decision in the whole Union. So we can actually claim there is a responsible selective openness, and I will focus in a moment on what type of FDI we're talking to. And as well, the latest communication of the Commission that was sent to the Council and the Parliament in December was talking about economic security tools, and the FDI regulation was included in these tools. In particular, is the joint communication 2025-977. So my research question today is whether security in its economic dimension can be seen as a new legal objective of the EU internal market. Getting into the first step of my analysis, I would like to mention, of course, the main normative focus, which is Regulation 2019-452. We're still calling as the current regulation. I will say in a moment why. And this regulation is enforced to allow member states to adopt decisions that might block, mitigate, or condition, or also authorize, of course, investment that might be risky or not for the security of their own security and, of course, of the Union as well. Still, I know you're familiar with it, but I want to underline several features. The first one is that the regulation lies on a competence dichotomy. On the one hand, there is Article 207, it was mentioned yesterday, is an Article 4 that attributes exclusive competence to the Union in common commercial policies. But on the other hand, we do have Article 4.2. In fact, the regulation itself says that the competence of the Union in this field operates without prejudice to the competence of member state in national security. So the regulation, what it does is basically like coordinating and not harmonizing the screening mechanism of the different member states. So we have significant heterogeneity across national system. Still, we do have national decision. So, which means that whenever like an FDI is under investment, the final decision to block, authorize, and mitigate is national. It's from member states. It's not from the European Union. It's not from the Commission. The Commission can just adopt in the cooperation mechanism, which is not the focus of my analysis today, several opinions. In the other part, we do have, I put here a substantial formalistic approach. It's not like a weird way to say it, but actually it was part of the doctrinal debate with the Xella judgment, and it's to reply to which investment the regulation apply, which is the substantial scope. In particular, whenever we talk to FDI, right now we have, when I say right now, I say to Regulation 2019, we have a formalistic approach, meaning that those are just non-EU investors that try to, through their investment in the Union, so in a Union enterprise, establish a long-lasting link thanks to the investment and also because to take control and management of the enterprise that received the investment in the Union. In this sense, the court in Xella adopt an approach that is like mere formalistic, meaning that we do not have the possibility to screen EU investment coming from the EU enterprises, but we do have the anti-circumvention clause, which is Article 3.6 of the current regulation, which allows the screening if the member state proves that the EU investors' aim to do this investment is to circumvent the screening mechanism, because these investments is ultimately controlled by a non-EU investors. So, the reform proposal, I didn't put here the number. It's because if the regulation 2019-452 is really clear to everybody, this regulation still does not have a number. It was just adopted the 8th of June. The Council passed the first reading before the Council, and now in the 16th of June, so just 2 days ago, was adopted. Now we have 18 months to allow member states to adopt all the different innovation. I will point out just two of them. The first one that is really important for my analysis is expansion of personal scope. We're just discussing a personal scope. So first of all, we have FDI that actually comes from EU investors, and in this sense, the one that are controlled by non-EU countries. And it's really important to see that in this case, it's not a difference between private, if the control comes from a private entity of the government, the public government, so we talk state-owned enterprises or not. And that's actually to follow, it's pretty evident, of course, it's not stated in the negotiation, that it's what the Advocate General Chapeta suggested in Xella in her conclusion. So to take into account also EU investment, because as she stated, how should we consider that an investment coming from the EU might be done with the aim to circumvent the screening if we're not even allowed to put this investment on the screening? How is that possible? The personal scope, thanks to a second legal basis, which is additional one to Article 207, is Article 114. There is a lot of debate of the stretching of the use of Article 114. Still, it is important, and I want to underline this, that Article 114 is not used to oppose the integration of the internal market, but to coordinate how the restriction to internal market should operate among member states. From the material scope, we do have several new aspects. First of all, we have obligation to member states to adopt a screening. Before there was no obligation, member state can or not adopt a screening mechanism, and actually I can say Cyprus, Croatia and Greece, which were three last member states that adopted screening member state. For instance, Cyprus, I guess, was April 2026. As well, Bulgaria has a screening mechanism, but in terms of cooperation mechanism, it's still a little bit weak. It's not out of the focus, but just to mention. So right now we have a minimum harmonization in terms of sector. They should be screened among all member states, and also we're not still talking about convergence, but we're not just talking about full harmonization, but just a convergence of national system. So let me go with the first focus on my analysis. The first one is whether the national screening mechanism today, as seen, since we do have still heterogeneity, and with the new proposal we will keep this heterogeneity in terms of like what is security for member states, whether they can block or mitigate the condition and sector, despite the one that are like common to everybody. How are those mechanisms compatible with the internal market logic? Of course, we do have a variable geometry proportionality test, and that's because first of all you have to consider which investment you are putting on the screening. Of course, if you talk about non-EU investment, then you will consider also Article 63. Whether if you talk about EU investors, in this sense, the proportionality test is more stricter. That's the golden share jurisprudence, and as well, non-EU shareholding are not considered. So it's like a substantial approach, but not fully. And you also have free movement of establishment. Whether you talk about sectors, then I want to underline that before it was just in terms of defense, the screening. Now we have an expansion also to economic sector, and there is a lot of debate going on because, of course, the restriction should not come just for economic purpose. There is jurisprudence of the Court of Justice that it's really clear. But is that possible, since actually deregulation still allows the inclusion of secular sector that are also economic? There is an answer in Xella in part 66, what it says, and also from test climate doctrine, that economic motives might justify restriction if they pursue an ultimate goal, that is general interest object as security in public order. The real last point on my analysis, I will not go deep because of matter of time, but that's the Unicredit BPM case. I'm pretty sure that you've been hearing this from mass media or also political discourse on it. And it's really peculiar because it's in an economic sector, and albeit non-economic in the same time, which is the financial sector, and it regards two Italian banks, but also two European banks, which means that those are banks that are already put under several supervision from different EU actors as well national actors. In this case, what happened was that bid from Unicredit to BPM, and actually the commission at first, which was the DG FISMA, no, the DG Com, authorized the bid, but then Italy intervened with golden power. Of course, I'm going really fast on this. But we do have several implications that I want just to point out. The first one is terminological, because right now we have a problem in terms of what does public security means in merger regulation, and if it's narrow or not to national security and public order, because of course, whenever we have an FDI that comes to a merger in financial sector, we can have a several overlap between different areas of EU law. As well, we have a procedural overlap, not just in terms of like vertical overlap, but also in terms of horizontal, because which is the competence to the DG FISMA, DG Com, DG Trade, also of course the bank, European Central Bank is authorized to do prudential supervision. So what is going on right now? There is an infringement procedure against Italy going on. Italy already intervened in normative sense, so they're trying to solve it as a procedural aspect right now, so to give precedence to European actors. I put here 3 interpretive strategies that doctrine actually suggests. And so to get back to my first question is like economic security and internal market object right now. I will respond in positive terms, so I think the Commission still wish this direction, but what is important to note that despite the presence of Article 4.2, as Advocate General Chapeta states, the mere fact that a national measure was adopted for the purpose of protecting national security cannot have the effect of rendering EU law inapplicable. In this case, we do have to consider proportionality tests as well. Thank you for your attention.